Welcome. I'd like to call to order tonight's meeting. It's now 4:33 p.m. Tonight is the January 22nd, 2025 budget workshop for the and we're also to cover the 24-25 mid-year goals update. We've decided to forego the goals update, move that to our next business meeting, and just focus on our budget workshop for tonight. So if you're interested in our goals, you may not want to continue watching at this point, and regroup with us at our next meeting. So this is just going to be for our budget meeting, if that's okay. A couple of quick things. Our regular announcement. This is our school committee meeting. It's televised, recorded, may be viewed on Comcast Channel 22 and Verizon Channel 34, on youtube.com/TewksburyTV. Under the open meeting law, the public is permitted to make an audio or video recording of an open session at a public meeting. At this time, I'm asking if anyone is recording tonight's meeting to please identify themselves, and seeing nobody, we'll move on to the next order of business, which is our Pledge of Allegiance. Join us. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic
for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, and then does anybody have any comments or anything to start before I turn this over to Mr. Libby? Mr. Libby, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to review our budget in front of our audience of one tonight. Our budget has been challenging this year, going into next and getting through this year as well. We've been very fortunate here in Tewksbury for the past few years to be in a very favorable financial situation, and things are starting to catch up with us, as they are in most places. So a little tighter financial picture around the whole state, and we're no different here in Tewksbury. So here's what we'll be looking like, and hopefully be able to keep the operation robust and fulfilling for our students. We always like to keep in mind our district strategy when we think about our budget and how we use our resources. It's been the same for a few years. This was developed with the school committee and our administrative team over the past couple of years. I'm not going to read it right now, but the theory of action and the district strategy is always on the forefront of our mind as we make financial decisions going through the budget. So the school budget is made up of four major parts, three of which are managed by the schools. Salary, that's wages paid to all of our staff, whether it's annualized salaries, hourly folks, overtime, part-time folks, anything that would show up on a person's W-2, paid directly to them via payroll. Operating accounts are contracted services, supplies, things like utilities, services like transportation that we use to operate the schools other than payroll. And we have a capital outlay section of our budget that we use to fund major purchases within the schools, mainly for maintenance of our buildings. Fixed costs are managed and shared with the town. Those are things like health insurance, employee health insurance, retirement of employees, unemployment costs, things like that, Medicare, Medicaid, that get shared with the town and managed at the town level as well. When we talk about the school budget, we generally talk about salary, operating, and capital outlay. Fixed costs gets weighed in at the end, but we have much less of a say in managing that area of our budget. So the school budget process is fluid. It reflects the district's needs at that moment in time. These needs are constantly changing, and our resources are constantly changing. The budget will reflect we reflect these changes between now and final approval. We constantly meet, things happen daily, weekly, that affect our budget, and we'll adjust those numbers as we get closer to May town meeting, right up until the time of town meeting, and even after. The school budget is part of the overall town budget for the town of Tewksbury. It's reviewed and recommended for approval to the town manager and the finance committee by our school committee. And the finance committee then recommends approval of a town budget to the town meeting in May of each year. And then the town meeting approves the budget. That is the vehicle that actually appropriates funds to each town department, including the schools. And so the final actual approval of funds for school and all departments rests with residents who attend town meeting. So where does school funding come from? We have traditionally done a 60-40 split of new revenues between the schools and the town. Each year we start with a baseline budget of what we had the previous year. The town does estimates on new revenues for the upcoming year, and we split those in a 60-40 fashion. The 60-40 split comes from historical sort of spending trends. Our spending accounts for about 60% of the overall spending in town. You can see in 24 and 25, these are the percentages of costs that are allocated to schools. These are the percentages of costs allocated to the town. So 60-40 has been sort of the traditional way we've split up any new funding. Here's some student data that just included for informational purposes. Grade level data and school data, just to keep FY23, FY24, so this is school year 23-24, student numbers. This year we're in now is in the middle here, school year 24-25. And then assumptions going into school year 25-26 assumes all students advance one grade. We assume the same enrollment at preschool. We don't really know those numbers just yet, but those are pretty stable year over year. Use census figures to estimate kindergarten enrollment. We do get census numbers from the town. We know that this year, the Heathbrook was a little higher than normal at 135. We, based on census numbers, expect that to drop back down to back into its normal, more normal range for the Heathbrook, around 110, 115 students for next year. And we assumed a 100-student drop from grade 8 to grade 9. That's what we typically see from historical evidence going from middle school into our high school. Some areas of focus that we thought about as we were projecting into next year. In the personnel area, maximizing the use of staff based on current student population and enrollment trends. The desire of both labor and management to transform use of contracted services to employees for many areas of special education. Increase balancing of special education programming between PK1 schools. We saw that a little bit this year with moving some more programming from the Dewing School down to the Heathbrook, and we want to see that increase again next year. And to begin implementing the recommendations of the special education audit. Couple of key points we're focusing on there, trying to reorganize and strengthen programs. We'll provide more vertically aligned special ed programming at each school, and restructuring of the PK program to include therapeutic learning centers at both PK1 schools. We worked with our staff who worked on a new PK model that was presented to central office about a month ago, I guess, and want to be able to support that effort moving forward into next year. From the operational side, we're always searching for opportunities in transportation, utilities, technology, supplies, and maintenance, and try to keep ahead of rising trends and rising cost trends in those areas. Technology, focus on communications, improve and consolidate our systems wherever possible. We're continuing our smart board to ClearTouch conversion district-wide, and make sure we provide inventory for our one-to-one device program. Building improvements. So within this budget, you'll see coming up, we're forced to reduce our capital outlay budget in order to meet our salary and operational needs and stay within the figure that we want to be within with the town. So that would mean future capital projects would require funding via town meeting articles. We kind of first dipped our toe in the water of that this year with getting some funding at the town meeting, and that will likely be the way we'll have to proceed if we want to get some projects done around major projects done around our schools in the future. The needs of the Heathbrook and Dewing get through 6 to 10 years. We have groups looking at those buildings to see what the best options are there, but for the short term, we still need to educate students there, and we have staff there that we need to make sure are safe and comfortable in those buildings. Our building and ground systems across the board, keeping those up and running and sufficient for our student and staff environments. One thing, an age-appropriate playground at the Heathbrook was on the docket for improvement. Now that we have more preschool programming at the Heathbrook School, we want to make sure we have appropriate playground equipment for those students to use. So this is an overview of our process that we use when we go through the budget. Salaries, typically 70% of our budget. We start with our current payroll roster, and we advance folks all steps, lanes, longevity per contracts, which we have in place this year, which is nice to know. So this is what the results of those changes, cost of living increases, steps, and longevity by group. Almost $2 million just in those salary areas. This is all funding sources and all staff in place. So we make adjustments to this as we go, but just as a starting point, that was the number that we started off with in our budget. We then look at, we adjust for retirements and resignations. We align employees paid from grants or revolving accounts appropriately. We go through each part-time, overtime, and extra duty accounts versus historical actuals, look for opportunities or shortfalls if we have areas where we're not using budgeted monies in overtime or we're underfunded in some areas. We make adjustments there. And then review with building principals and department heads. You'll see this line appear throughout our process, as we wanted to stress that this is a constant. We're always kind of back and forth with our building principals and/or department heads as we get information and go through these steps. So in the operating side of our budget, which is typically 28% or so of the school's budget, we adjust for known contractual increases in transportation, utilities, service contracts. So service contracts can be anything from maintenance contracts. We have contracts for plumbing, roofing, electrical, HVAC, to therapeutic services. We have behavioral, psychological, occupational therapies, physical therapies, anything that we pay a contracted person to do as opposed to an employee falls into a service contract. So they can be in all areas of our operation. And tuition is also a biggie in our operating world. A 3.67% tuition increase was approved by the OSD, Occupational Services Division. They set the tuition rates for out-of-district schools in the state, and they recommended a 3.67 tuition increase across the board for those schools. So when we applied those to our contracts in place and then met with our folks and made some adjustments as we saw we could in different areas, we saw some decreases and saw some increases. Maintenance contracts, the result was a $42,000 decrease. However, we added $268,000 this year through a budget transfer. So that's a little bit deceiving in our maintenance contract area. Got to keep that in mind, that we did add money to the budget during this school year, as our maintenance contracts did increase. Other contracted, technology, athletics, instructional, and some of these are administrative, increased $89,000. Special ed contracted reduction. This is mostly in the area of contracted aides, an area we had discussed with the ESP unit about trying to reduce the use of contracted services for that purpose, and we reflected that in this budget. In transportation, it's year 3 of our 3-year contract with Tewksbury Transit, set to increase a little over $200,000. Tuition, when we applied the known increase plus some new students on board, it increased our budget $734,000. Of note there, though, we did increase circuit breaker spending this year in FY25 by just under $2 million, which is mostly spent tuition on tuition for our out-of-district students. Utilities was a net zero. We kind of realigned how we fund our utilities, but we do have a contracted rate on utilities for, I believe it's another 2 years. So we should be locked in on rates for our gas and electricity. We then reviewed these versus historical actuals, and we adjust for any anomalies, and again, review with principals and department heads to see where we could maybe do things differently or adjust as needed. We Next in our process is to meet with the town manager, establish the amount available from the town in projected new revenues, that 60-40 split, where that's going to align. We share our initial needs, what we think we're going to need to get by in the upcoming year. Again, review with building principals and department heads. We also look at other revenue sources that we may be able to use as appropriate. We have to be careful with this area, make sure the use of the funds is appropriate for the need or the use. You know, is the revenue going to be recurring? Is the expense going to be recurring? We want to line up recurring revenues with recurring expenses. Or if we expect the expense to decrease or be eliminated, you know, maybe then we can use a one-time or short-term solution in that case. Or do we expect the increase is going to be increasing? Then we have to address that differently as well. And as always, review with building principals and department heads. So overall, when we went through all those steps, we came out with a 3.44% increase on salary, operating, and capital outlay. The math gets a little fuzzy here on capital outlay. We reduced to $250,000 in next year's budget. But we're comparing to the revised FY25 column here, which we took out $740,000 in a budget transfer this year to move into our salary and operating area. So it looks like we increased the capital outlay budget because we're comparing to the lowered number. If we compare to where we started the year and where we traditionally fund capital outlay at $789. We've funded it there for the past 3 years. It's a 68% reduction to go to $250. So the other difference you'll see here was we took a health insurance offset. We're funding our all federally funded programs are being fully burdened with their health insurance costs for their employees. Mainly that's food services, and to a lesser extent, a couple of our grant programs, but it's close to $400,000 that the insurance comes out of the employee match on the insurance. The employee portion of the insurance is close to $400,000 for those employees. So that will come out of those grant and revolving funds. We actually started it in FY25, and we're taking the credit for it in next year's budget. So the number that the town manager and I came to agreement on was this 1.95 million increase. And then I noted here the revenue increase that the 60% revenue increase that we would have gotten would have been 1.2 million. The town manager was able to adjust some projections and get us to the 1.9 figure, which is more palatable and less cuts that we'll need to make on our end to make our operation whole. When we factor in the fixed costs and debt, it works out to a 3.63 increase overall. So what's that made up of? Salary, 71.1% of the school's budget. is made up of salary. It's mostly, most of our budget is in payroll. I highlighted the AIDS educational support line here, as that increased quite a bit from where we were last year. Traditionally there, I think I looked last year, they were 6% of our overall salary, up to 7%, and they were around 2.2 million with an FTE of, I think they were around 74. So as we lower that contracted service line for ESPs, and we want to bump up this FTE and the number for our employee aid group. Also, there's 3 FTE employee aides who are funded via PK tuitions. So they're over here in the grant and revolving area of our budget. That tends to be a pretty steady program, and we're looking to grow that program again this year. But the biggest group, of course, is teachers. 66% of the salary accounts are for teachers. We have 11 teachers funded through grants and revolving accounts. This part-time, overtime, and hourly is sort of a filler with folks who either our own folks or our part-time people, lunch monitors, substitutes, athletic folks who work our athletic events. It's kind of a mishmash of other costs that that we see generally come through payroll in the town. Operating jumped up a little bit to 28.75% of our budget. It's generally around 28, went up a bit this year. It's a little more evenly spread out than the payroll. You'll note special ed services shows a decrease. Again, that's the special ed one-to-one aides being converted into more employees and less of a contracted service. And our tuition bumps up here as well. It's quite a large increase from where we were in FY25. Capital outlay, just under 0.5% of our budget. I'm showing it reducing from the 789 to 250. I explained earlier how, we already took a bunch of this 789 out of the budget this year, but traditionally that's what we've budgeted from FY23 to FY25. The budget was 789. We left the 250. That's historically been reserved for textbook or device replacement or upgrades. So we wanted to make sure we kept that in place to maintain the instructional program. And again, future capital projects will require funding via town meeting warrant articles, funded from available reserves. So we still keep this capital projects list going and keep it alive and well. The one that's the Ryan HVAC project, we're going to have to, I think, hold on that. We're hoping to have that completed this summer. We're going to rebid it this summer and possibly get some pricing and maybe go back to the starting board and look at that possibly for the summer of 2026, given the uncertainty of the economics of the town doesn't seem like the right time to go to the town meeting for a project of that nature. So I think we're going to hold on that for the time being. Capital projects completed from 22 to 25. The list is much shorter than we've typically seen in years past. The ones this year we've been discussing at our meetings here, the WIN HVAC, that was funded with ESSER monies plus some town meeting warrant article money. The greenhouse classroom is February. We're looking at February vacation now. So that's, hopefully that's on tap to get finished up. And then some other kitchen upgrades we funded with food service money. Grants and revolving accounts play a big part in our budget. We have 49 separate funds currently active. We'll be closing 3 at the end of this year, fiscal '25. So we'll be down to 46, but all have a specific purpose, must be used appropriately, must be used for the related to the purpose of the fund, whether it's a grant or revolving account driven by fees. We can't take parking fees and go buy textbooks for the second grade. We have to spend parking fees on parking-related expenses. We have to spend athletic fees on athletic-related expenses. Food service money has to get spent on food service-related expenses. So we have to make sure we're using that money appropriately. Approximately 38 positions are funded via grants and revolving accounts. This is our grant funding available for FY25. We don't know what's going to be available in FY26 yet, but this is generally a good indication of, at least in the blue, is our entitlement or allocation grants. These are grants we get every year. Those are the grants shown in blue. And we still have some money available back from our FY24 allocation grants that will clean up this year. We do have 2 years to spend these allocation grant funds. We can carry those over for up to 2 years. The only caveat with that is with Title I, you can only carry over up to 15% of the total without a waiver, and you can get a waiver for 1 year. So the other thing of note, we received a warning that we may have a $170,000 reduction to our Title I grant for FY26. We received that warning last year as well, and then we didn't see that reduction. We got the full funding for Title I. So we're going to plan for the worst and hope for the best. We won't know the actual disposition of that grant until probably the middle of the summer. That's when we found out this year that we were fully funded with the Title I. So it was good news when we got that additional funding and we were able to ramp up the Title I program. But as of right now, we're going to have to plan for that program to face a reduction. These are our other revolving funds that are raised from different sources. The source of income is listed here in this column, and what we typically spend the money on is over here on the right. Highlighted school lunch, we have a slide on that to kind of explain that one a little more in depth. It's one of our larger revolving accounts. And also same with circuit breaker, we have a slide on that, kind of explain how the circuit breaker program works. We have two new funds that we started this year. Elementary clubs, we started collecting fees for some elementary clubs based on the new Appendix B programs that are running at those schools. And we received a reimbursement from the state for some school-age students in our emergency shelters in town. And we're able to spend those funds on student-related expenses as we incur those. Also in red here, the Special Ed Reserve Fund was established at the town meeting in 2016. We'll likely be tapping that during FY25 as our special ed expenses have been higher than typical. So that's kind of a coming attraction, but there is that 725 has been sitting there since the October 2016 town meeting. So circuit breaker, it's a Commonwealth Special Education Commonwealth Reimbursement Program, provides financial assistance to public school districts to offset the cost of delivering high-cost special education services to students. So this is an example of a student educational cost of $155,000 with services and tuition, transportation of $25,000. Circuit breaker, DESE each year sets a circuit breaker threshold, which is the average cost to educate a special ed student in the state. I used $50,000 this year. I think it's like $51,125. But so the gross educational claim in this case here would be $105,000. The transportation claim would be $25,000. The reimbursement rate, in typical years, it's 75% for the whole cost of these students. This year, FY25, the year we're in now, the educational cost was reimbursed at 75%. Transportation at this point was reimbursed at 44%. There is hope, I'm told, that it may bump back up to the full 75% during the year if things break right at the state level. But right now it's at the 44%. And I use 44% to model for next year as well when we get to that point. This is a 5-year history of sort of where we've been with the balance, cash balance in the account at the beginning of the year, and the net claim that we've put in through the state. This is so this is like taking all of these $89,000 for each student and adding it all up. This year came up to, if we were fully funded, it would have been 4.6. What we're actually getting right now with transportation at 44% is 4.18. Hopefully, like I said, that may go up. This is how we've been spending that money this year to this point and projected to the end of the year. This is what we have encumbered on our tuition and the 2 payments we've yet to receive for this year. That would be our end of the year balance at the end of June. Projected numbers for FY26, our FY25 claim should be substantially higher. But we have also budgeted a higher number for our, to pay out of circuit breaker, out of the circuit breaker account, according to that, accordingly corresponding to that increase. Food services is another one of our larger accounts in the revolving world. Just our cash balance here over the years, revenues and expenses. This is 2025 year to date. Participation is outstanding with the free breakfast and lunch programs. And we still see the same amount of revenue as we did when we were charging folks for breakfast and lunch. And noted here, beginning in FY25, food service being assessed the cost of their employee benefits, and we'll continue this practice through FY26. This is the employees that we pay through this account. The food service program is fully self-funded. This is what our budget will look like in the town meeting book, with the fixed costs fully expanded, health insurance, retirement, Medicare, unemployment insurance, and debt, showing that 3.63% increase. So these are just some of the steps we've taken to offset the rise in those costs we've seen. The town contribution above the typical 60%. So the difference between that 1.9 that we got from the town and the 1.2, which would have been the 60% of revenues, was this 684,000. Fully charging all federal programs for employee benefits, close to 400,000. Moving funds from our capital outlay, 500,000. And tapping into circuit breaker more than we have in the past by 600,000. We're able to get 2.2 million in additional revenues to help keep our operation running smoothly. Additional steps that we're taking without a direct or immediate financial impact. We're having discussions on reorganizing and strengthening our in-district programming and improving communications regarding non-special ed interventions available to students. Those are some of the things that we took away from our special education audit. So next steps, continued discussions with principals, department leaders, elected officials to address our ever-changing needs. And then as our needs or resources change, the school will be refining the budget. The budget resources and needs are constantly being updated and analyzed for the best use of available and appropriate resources. And that will continue through May town meeting and will likely produce changes in our overall budget, which is shown by those crazy arrows. But we think the 78, 280, 488 will get it done for us here in town. I'll post our more detailed account level documents on our website first thing tomorrow morning. We'll have summaries by cost center. We sort of break down our operation into 13 cost centers, either schools or departments, and then some details behind that going into the account level. We also have the same, sort of the same information, just packaged a different way by DESI function code. These are the codes that are used across the state to categorize expenses into different groups. And then within those categorized groups, there's 6 classifications that are used across the state. And this is our budget sort of broken down into those groups. And that will be posted as well as the standard that shows what goes into each of those, what makes up each of those codes. And that brings us to the end.
Thank you, Mr. Liddy. Do you mind when you post that, just giving us like sending a quick email?
Yeah,
Just even with the links or whatever, just so it's an electronic version.
certainly. I'll send them to you folks too.
Thank you so much, that's
Yep.
great. And feel free to join us back at the
Okay.
table and we can chat, make it easier. Lots to digest. Thank you so much for all your hard work. This year was not past years, for sure. Questions or comments? Mr. Russo, are you ready? Mr. Moncada? Would you like to start?
Happy to start, but it's up to you.
Sure.
Well, so maybe I'll just start by asking my colleagues to just bear with me here for a few moments. So it's kind of feverishly taking some notes, Mr. Libby, so thanks for taking us through all that. So a few things and a couple thoughts. So with collective bargaining, obviously being all set
Yep.
across the district, salaries, as you pointed out, make up roughly 71%. I mean, so are we maximizing efficiency? And I guess maybe even a step further, is there some sort of like roll forward of sorts, maybe by school, that we could do in total? Doesn't matter what unit you belong to, and none of that. It's just more about understanding the resources at each school when we think about, especially when, because we're constantly looking at enrollment data. And so it's nice to kind of be able to say, okay, well, we have 800 students at the center school, and that's consistent, but our head count is increasing, for one reason or another. And maybe, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But to understand that, I think, would really go a long way to understanding sort of the efficiency maximization, especially where salaries do make up such a large part of our budget, obviously.
Yeah, that'd be a good exercise, actually.
I do think it would be helpful, again, when you're just trying to contextualize, there's so many numbers that are being thrown out at people, and again, it's just trying to just basically justify to the general public that, listen, we're spending 70% of our budget, and this is why. And because everyone sees enrollment down over the last couple decades or so, but we know that our head count really hasn't gone down and hasn't attributed to that. So.
And the cost of business has gone up.
Gone up, correct. So I just think that to tie that, I think would help. So, and I know last year when we talked about the budget for FY25, there were some retirements, maybe resignations that were forthcoming that we weren't maybe going to replace at that time, just sort of natural attrition. I noticed in this presentation there really wasn't any mention of that for FY26. I'm assuming that there are some resignations or retirements planned, and are there any risks of any unmet needs?
I'm sorry, are there any risk of?
Any unmet needs with anybody that might be retiring or resigning for the end of the school year?
We are having that conversation with the principals now.
Okay.
We have received some additional retirement plans. However, again, as you said, we do look at our current enrollment and the trends
Yep.
to determine where we can take the attritional hit
Yep.
and where we need to maybe move that position. We know last year, second grade,
Yep.
went up 2 more than expected.
Yep.
But as we look to level off second, third, and fourth next year, based on what we expect the enrollment trend to look like, may utilize one of those attritional losses. So we don't foresee any reductions,
Yep.
but some reorganizations. Now, I say that in the teaching end, we're looking at all staff
And I think
in
that's
that
where that
regard.
roll forward too would be helpful, because again, there is some reorganization, and we understand that.
Yes.
You know, again, population fluctuates, et cetera, so you need to meet the needs of the time of the year. I was extremely grateful and happy to see you mention and refer to some of the things that came out of the special education audit in terms of being able to add things to the budget to support that. Obviously, there's some, things to, and that's a sort of a longer runway than maybe even just the next year. Again, I guess when you're thinking about some of those recommendations that we want to try and implement, maybe trying to figure out if there's any cost-effective alternatives. I know you probably are. I'm sure you're considering it as, you hear from things from other districts. I know from a school committee perspective, as we interact with other school committee members, those are some of the things that are at our forefront. So just sort of a thought there. As far as the proposed increase, so the 3.4% overall, sustainable, it sounds like it's sustainable with the overall financial plan, just based on your meeting with the town manager. And with the warrant deadline being really in a short 3 weeks or so, are we expecting any sort of capital improvement funding to be placed in the warrant article at this time?
I have no plans to
Okay,
address that right now.
okay.
With that, through you, Madam Chair, we're certainly not losing sight of some of those capital improvement plans, projects
Yep.
that were slated as more of a priority than others. But, for May,
Yeah,
the plan is to get through this budget
Yep.
and then look at if
for
we...
October, maybe.
Right, if we are considering an October or other town meeting warrant article for any major, that, I think I probably should have started too with, Mr. Libby has, and I know you mentioned this, Madam Chair, really worked tirelessly, looking at a reorganization of this entire budget, as well as our discussions with principals, a couple of different times now, how we reorganize what we have. And this is a very conservative projection. It is a fluid process, but it does rely on us using those available funds that we once, had built in the budget. The rising costs require that. The rising cost of doing business, I should say. So, it is a projection,
Yep.
and hopefully we don't get surprised by any other unexpected costs that may just, change these numbers a little along the way. But we think this is pretty solid reorg of funds. Not ideal, but
Yep. So,
Sorry to interrupt you, Madam Chair.
Okay.
No,
Can I ask a
it's
question while
open,
we're on the capital outlay,
Yeah.
just that question?
yeah.
I know that several meetings over the last year or so, we were asking about grant funding or ESSER funding that was left over specific to that Ryan HVAC. Did we use it? Did we lose it? It got used?
No, there's still money in the warrant article. We used all the ESSER money.
That was what, yeah,
The ESSER money's gone.
right. So we used it, though. That was what I know we were like
Yeah.
looking to make sure we
we
used
didn't
that
lose,
before.
we didn't leave
lose it.
anything.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I guess, so talking about sustainability, to me, and I certainly want to speak for myself here, it doesn't seem sustainable to me when we are increasing our budget roughly 3 to 3.2, 3.4% this year, or for next year, excuse me. We're carving out money out of our capital outlay to fund some parts of the budget that maybe we're lacking in, for lack of a better term. And then also saying that one of our priorities is to maintain the Dewing in Heathbrook for the next 6 to 10 years. When we know that there are capital dollars that we are going to need for both of those schools for that time period. I don't know what the answer is. I'm not suggesting that you should have an answer right now either. I'm simply just trying to understand a creative way, more for the public to understand.
Yeah.
This is a complicated question, and I know that we have a long-range space committee that's looking at some of these, and that's kind of part of the big factor of it all. And that goes back to the kind of the warrant article question, I guess, that we were talking about, that maybe some of those one-time funds maybe get introduced over that time period as well. Who knows? It just, like I said, it just doesn't seem sustainable to me. You mentioned that the ESP staff reduction, the contractual service reduction, excuse me, that's being offset with salary, so understood there. You did refer to something, and I just want to see if you can clarify. You said between the $1.9 million increase and the $1.2 million allotted increase, maybe it was through the town manager, I'm not sure, but we were able to adjust some projections. Can you clarify what that means? Local receipts? Again, I know that might be more of a town manager question, but maybe through our conversations with him, is there any clarity there?
Yeah, which 1.9?
So the 1.9 was the difference in the overall school budget, but the revenue increase was only 1.2, so there was a $680,000 roughly shortfall. So obviously to balance that, there was some adjustment maybe to some projections. Can you just clarify again what that?
He was able to raise his figure from 1.2 to 1.9. I'm not sure.
Maybe through local receipts, potentially.
What's that?
Maybe through some local receipts, potentially.
Yeah, I know. I don't want to speak for the.
Yeah, sure.
Town
Sure. I just didn't know
manager,
if you knew through your conversations.
He said that I thought he said some of his revenue numbers, might be lower than, might have some room to grow.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
Madam Chair, and for our next presentation, we'll number the slides. It might be a little easier for you to refer back to the
Yeah,
one
sure.
that I think you were
Yeah.
looking at.
Yep, all good, all good. And then just some sort of like small thing. So on the, on where does the funding come from slide, I think this says, it's labeled FY '24 and '25. I think it's supposed to be '25 and '26 now?
I haven't got the updated slides yet from the
Okay.
new town manager, so I left the ones from last year.
All right.
It generally
It's
is-
roughly still around that 6.7
Yeah.
or so, give or take.
It
Okay.
doesn't change too much. I was hoping no one noticed that, Rich.
Sorry.
Well,
Sorry. Okay. I don't think I have any other questions at this time, but I definitely will reserve the right further.
Yeah, of course, or even today.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else want to take a stab at some questions or thoughts?
I have one. And again, same as Rich, I want to digest it a little bit more and kind of look through it and compose my thoughts a little bit. But in terms of the transportation contract that we have, being in year 3 of 3, what is that looking like? I guess it's already budgeted for, we're already in a contract, so that's fine for this year. But I think, as everybody is aware, that cost is a significant one.
Yeah.
And is there a plan to kind of look at that sooner rather than later to see
Yeah,
what
we'll
that-
go out to bid probably in the fall. We'll put out a bid spec. It's good to get out early on those. We'll get more interest the earlier we get out.
Even creative ways with residents and families to see who's using it and thinking outside the box a little, I guess. Some of the things we've seen other places, other towns, and what they're doing. They're looking for an RFP and just kind of following the status quo of what we've always done is
Right.
what it is. But I think things look different lately.
Yeah, aligning at least the preschool on, the front end and the back end of the day at the Dewing and the Heathbrook has helped from a sort of a logistical standpoint. At least they're sharing the vehicles. It's one fewer separate run we needed to make in the morning and in the afternoon. And the bus company I was asking them how they thought that was working out, and they thought it's been good, other than it's nice when the driver's the same in the morning and the afternoon, or the way in and the way home. It's not always morning and afternoon, sometimes it's morning and late morning, but they like, the drivers like to see the same kiddos going in and going home, and that's not always the case with this model. But
Okay.
Madam Chair, can I interject on this topic? For out-of-district transportation, are we able to negotiate collectively with other towns, or do we do that already?
we do,
Okay.
yeah. We're in a.
Does that seem to help?
It did at first. We haven't, other than the Valley Collaborative students, we haven't seen as much vehicle sharing as we thought we would, just because of the hour requirement. We need to stay under an hour ride for students. And if we add too many kiddos from Billerica, Chelmsford, Tewksbury, you tend to, you're in the vehicle too long. So we push that limit sometimes. So, but the Valley Collaborative students, we've seemed to have been able to combine more so than most of the other schools. And we are shopping around constantly now there's a lot of new vendors coming on the scene. We get probably weekly a new company that says, hey, I'm here in business, I'm willing to take a shot at what you guys do. We don't need to bid those services under 30B because their special ed is exempt. So as long as I checked out a couple with, surrounding communities, found out if they have used them, if they're reliable, if, their employees need to be vetted, like all drivers do. So, we can try other new companies if they're available and have the appropriate vehicles for our students.
It's expensive.
Yeah.
It's expensive. If Mr. Libby can get on the phone and work with the new company to save even $100 each way, that's happening. It's very expensive. It's again, these are increases that are just unmanageable, unexpected. Again, these are best projections, and we have to go with that from trends and increases that we're been seeing, but we could never have even projected the individual ride costs that we're seeing now.
Can we negotiate on contracts like, if they don't hit a certain service level requirements, there's a potential for a penalty, or, because we frequently hear the stories, and I shouldn't say frequently, but you hear the stories, my child, it took 2 hours to get home, or we called the dispatch and no one answered the phone, and whatever it may be. And why, if they're not hitting us, if it's not in the contract, you're not hitting this level of service, why are we paying you?
Right.
So maybe there should be a penalty.
Yeah, there are some financial penalties for, being a half hour late, being 2 hours late on a consistent basis. I've seen that in contracts.
Do we do that?
We can look at that for sure, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It's just another way to potentially
Yeah.
save some money or get some money back on ever-increasing transportation costs.
Correct.
It was tongue-in-cheek and somewhat of a I guess you would say, in the realm of how illogical these increases are, it would be cheaper for us to buy the high school student being transported their own car
Right.
than it is to transport them daily. And that is obviously not what we
Right.
can do or are prepared to do, but it's absolutely, outrageous what the cost of that ride is.
Can I, so just as a follow-up to this then, and maybe this is an unpopular thought, but I'm going to put it out there anyway, and it's come up in previous meetings. There has to be a way to reduce the fleet of buses that we have. We have 23 buses in total that do 2 to 3 routes depending on the bus that are to transport 3,200 kids, but we know only really transport about 2,000 to 2,200 kids because parents drive their students and because high school juniors and seniors drive their cars, right, for the most part. And then even further than that, freshmen and sophomore siblings go with their junior and senior older sibling, right, in some cases. So there has to be a way to engage families out there to get a commitment for the cost that we're spending, because we've already spent the cost, but we don't really need that many buses. And I get it, maybe it's an unpopular thought, but we're facing uncharted territory, not only within our school department budget, but as we heard during negotiations when Mr. Montori would share some information about the town in the next 5 years, it's not sustainable. And I think that we keep beating a dead horse with transportation almost every single meeting in some way, shape, or form. And I don't know, maybe it is time to start to survey parents getting ahead for FY '26 now about something to change. I don't know.
And that was what I was going
Yeah,
with,
I
thinking
know,
outside the box
I
a
knew you
little
were.
bit, just to try to figure out,
Yeah.
work together, figure out what's wanted.
Yeah.
What's luxury versus a need to have type of thing.
Right,
So,
right.
yeah.
And then just the last question, and I'm going to leave it alone. You don't have to have this answer right off the top of your head, but we wouldn't be a school committee that was doing its diligence if we didn't ask why the school committee budget was increasing 60 grand next year. So, something to look at. You don't need to necessarily answer right now. If you want to do a little homework on there, our budget has increased substantially, and where we were dealing with collective bargaining last year, I would have thought that last year or previous year would have been more than the upcoming year. So, something to take back to maybe.
Pretty sure it's medical falls under you.
Okay,
It just,
Okay.
that's where it lands in the scheme of things.
okay,
And nothing you have any control over.
okay, all right, fair enough.
But when we get
Last
workers'
thing I want
comp
is
claims,
that resident asking.
those charges, the town charges back to an account that falls under your, and I noticed it was
Okay, tied to medical.
higher than normal.
Okay,
Madam Chair,
noted.
I'll drop another word that may not be a popular word, and that is fee.
Yeah,
Our transportation service is free
yeah,
for all. We have asked our athletic director to do an analysis of fees across the board with different districts. We certainly makes it a little bit more tedious when you look at clubs, but I think it's important that we consider that we have fees in some areas, not in others. What are other districts doing?
Yep.
To offset the cost of doing that business as well. So I'm hoping that we'll have an analysis for you that's, worth information. Clearly, we'll have that done before this whole budget process is through.
Yep.
I'm not sure if it'll be February or March.
just on that, with regards to transportation fees, I know that there are certainly other districts that charge to take bus transportation. I guess my only fear with that here locally is that we don't charge fees now, and we already have a traffic congestion problem
Sure.
by many of our schools for 2 hours out of the day. And nothing you can do about that in a lot of different ways, but the moment we start charging fees now, that traffic problem just went way up because now parents are going to drive their kids. Again, maybe it's the answer, maybe it's an unpopular point, but it might be the answer. Yeah. You might have
Correct
some
me,
thoughts.
I think, were you discussing activity fees.
I think we should look at our fee schedule across the board, not to make necessarily changes, but it's important to note the cost of everything has increased. This isn't just transportation, you know, whether it, and remember, we use buses for these, the clubs and activities as well. When I say clubs, I'm talking about all after-school and extracurricular. So the cost of doing business, whether it's the stipended amounts, whether it's all of it, have gone up. Renting facilities, all of it. So I think it's important to note you have been a committee who has really not, I don't even remember the last time we looked at fees. It's definitely tens of years ago, maybe, right? It was when this school, before this school was built, that it was, so I think, you know, it's just timely. And that certainly will be a topic of whether it's discussion or consideration, and, you know, just understand what they are and what that looks like in our area. You know, if we look at a radius around Tewksbury, not necessarily everybody, is that worth noting?
Because those are athletic events, any transportation after school, is that within the transportation contract now?
Yeah.
It's built in, right? Like a certain number of miles or time, or how is it now?
We asked for a rate on late buses, splitting the town into thirds, splitting the town into halves, splitting the town
Okay.
into fourths, and we estimated how many runs we would do of each type. Similar to athletics, we, asked for a price I think we set it at 1 to 25 miles, which gets most of the surrounding communities, and then 25 to 50 miles is a different rate. 50 to 100 is another rate. I believe that's how we did it this year.
Okay, thank you.
You know, I certainly think I'm proud of our district in so many ways. You hear me say this all the time, in how competitive we are athletically, in our Dharma programs, and the offerings that there are in this district for some of the academic programs, whether it's, project, the UN group that meets, to the robotics, to everything that there is to be had at the high school, things that are now trickling down to the younger grades, sitting in the APB committee and just talking about the level of interest that there is with the staff in wanting to expand and do more. It's hard to not sit there and just be so enthusiastic in wanting that for the students. So I want us to be able to offer as much as we possibly can. So in order for us to do that, I agree. I think we do have to look at some of the fees. We're a small district, and that definitely was a topic of conversation that came up in our space committee in terms of just our curriculum in general in offerings. But I don't want to see the district have to pare back some of those things, because I do think the students in Tewksbury have been allowed to grow and be the students that they are now because of what the district offers. I don't want to change that. So we have to find a way, I think, to let them continue to do those things, and we might have to look at our fees, unfortunately. So, and that's, let's maybe continue that conversation for sure.
I had one other thing I wanted to
please
ask.
go.
For when we need to get equipment, like, for example, the playground that you mentioned, or there was a mention of the center, like for the mats, the wrestling mats, do we always have to buy new? Is there a way to get refurbished, or is there any function to do that? Like, let's say another school's closing somewhere. They're selling off all of their stuff. Does that go, can you find that somewhere?
Some things, yes. But playground equipment, no. As soon as that comes out of the ground, it loses its structural integrity. Because we were going to move some things from the Trahan School when we were
West Street.
closing that, and that had a fairly new playground.
Right.
We were going to see if we could move some of that equipment to our other schools, to Heathbrook, and it wasn't, we were told that can't happen. The other equipment, I'm not sure where there's a market for that. Our moving folks, when we moved into the new school, had told us a lot of stuff that that they take from old schools ends up in overseas locations.
Okay.
We took advantage of some items like that, cafeteria tables.
Yeah, sure.
Where we purchase used when a new school was built. I don't recall the district, but, so when available, absolutely, we'll take advantage of that opportunity. But I wish it were available for everything.
Yeah,
It's
I just
not.
don't know, you know, like when a manufacturing business goes out of business,
Yeah.
like that equipment can be refurbished and resold. I mean, there was a place on 495 that used to sell that stuff, you know, so I'm just wondering if there was
Yeah.
a similar thing
And
for,
we've used their services at times.
yeah. Yeah. Okay.
And there are different, some of our projects are appropriate to be funded with rental fees or, rec basketball fees or, things that fit into those categories will fund with those resources. So, we're not
Yeah, I
We're
just
not
was,
completely shut out of doing some of these,
Okay.
some of these projects.
okay. And the only other one, the last thing I had was, you mentioned the grants. Are there grants in the pipeline, or is that it? That's it? Like, these are the grants available, or are we looking at any that just didn't make this list? The one, I guess your list is ones we already have.
The FY '25.
But are there- is there anything in the pipeline?
The ones we are in, the entitlement grants that we get every year. There'll be, the DESI announces, opportunities for grants monthly.
I mean, we unfortunately did not make it through to the end on a Playful Learning grant, but we're still looking at other grants that support our current programming, like Project Lead the Way, and the name of one. Student Voice. We'll
going
keep
in
looking for
tomorrow.
them.
Sure.
Yes, we have, we have another.
We have an
grant.
application going in tomorrow on a competitive grant.
We have 2 grants going in this week and next week, so all the competitive grants that come out, we pretty much try to apply
Yeah.
for, to offset some sort of cost.
Okay.
As long as you meet the criteria, like they might say, the criteria is you have to have, 100%
Free and reduced. or-
Yeah, right.
reduced. and
Lower
we
income.
don't meet that, so.
Yeah, I get it.
We
Okay.
wouldn't apply, but if we meet the criteria, we.
I didn't doubt that we were always constantly looking. It's just I was curious if we had it, so, thank you.
Yeah, I want to piggyback on grants. I had a question about that as well. So looking at the presentation that we got tonight, for the ones that were on the table for '24, the balance, did you see that those are still being used?
Yeah.
Okay. I was just looking at what was left on the table for '24, and it just seemed like a lot.
Yeah, we have 2 years to spend.
Thank you. I didn't, yeah, I missed that. Okay. That was my question.
We have to spend those, we have to spend those this year,
Okay,
by September 30th.
30th.
Of
Yep.
25.
25,
Okay.
or we lose it.
Yep.
No, so that
I'll
one.
just keep asking you.
Won't lose it. Assure you, we won't lose it.
Just keep, sticky note.
I have a few questions. Mr. Libby, with the DPW and the merge with some of the school facility maintenance and all coming together, how is that cost sharing going to work at the town? Has that been worked out, or is that something you're kind of still?
No,
Okay,
it
just
has
curious.
not.
I
Yeah.
would be curious how that's going to play out, if there's going to be any, what the impact will be to
Yeah.
our budget.
No, John asked that question when we were meeting on his budget, because we do have an account for the fire station, the old fire station, where they're located now for utilities. And we were kind of wondering, we'll have to have a conversation with the DPW folks and the town manager and kind of sort that out.
Okay. I mean, I guess there's a larger conversation there too as well, like in terms of equipment and usage and allocation. There's just a lot, you know,
Yeah.
maybe even contracts, it goes bigger than that. So I would be interested to
Yeah,
know.
I mean, the understanding from the start was it was just strictly space. We were going to
Okay.
be in space with them. There was no sharing other than what goes on today. Sometimes, you know, they might ask to borrow our Bobcat if theirs breaks and ours is available. So things like that could continue to happen, but other than that, it was going to be just a location thing.
Okay, all right. Another, in terms of the Center Elementary, with the building of the Center Elementary, was there any funding that was kind of left on the table that could still be applied to anything that is still needed at the Center Elementary?
Another good question. I don't know yet. They're still closing out the MSBA piece of that. The town is. I am constantly told that there's still money available in the high school project
Right.
that we can use. That
Like,
we're
could that apply to the roof?
Or
we're looking at the floor,
Floor.
these
Okay.
floors on this floor.
Okay, great.
I just asked John to contact our architect engineer, gave us a quote to get, to begin a, I guess feasibility on what the fix would be to fix these cracks and prevent them from reoccurring. So I asked John to get in touch with him and get the ball rolling on that.
Okay.
So, but yeah, I think it has to do with the way the town borrowed the money and then what's left over. I think Richard may have structured the borrowing differently, though, on the center school than he did with this school. So we'd
curious.
have to go to them and find
I
out.
didn't know if to, yeah.
Yeah.
And then for the circuit breaker, knowing that we had these kind of end-of-year costs that seemed pretty significant at the time, and hoping and expecting that there'll be a larger reimbursement for FY '25, '26. When do you get those numbers?
So we do the giant spreadsheet, which basically it's just a giant spreadsheet for each student. We can't do it till the end of the year when we know what we've actually spent
Yep.
on each student. But I did do a projection of, I know the transportation costs and the tuition costs. The other thing that goes in the pool is services, you know, occupational therapy, speech therapy, behavioral, things like that. I didn't even put that in the picture right now because I don't know, you know, sometimes those can go on at the beginning of the year and then the students doing great, they don't need the OT anymore, they don't need the PT anymore, we're going to cancel those services so they don't get them for the rest of the year. So I didn't want to muddy the waters with those type of costs. But just with transportation and tuition, we were projected to see a pretty sizable increase next year if, unless something dramatic happens at the state and the funding changes at the state level.
Madam Chair, if I can just remind, I know the committee is aware of this, but the circuit breaker reimburses, and Dave has a slide on that that shows that process. The reason our circuit breaker would increase is because our costs have significantly increased. And remember that what we had projected in last year's budget is 75%, and the transportation circuit breaker went to 44%. So again, these are projected numbers based on our expected, well, what the costs were this year, and whether there's any extraordinary relief, we still will be looking into that. But because of those increased costs, that's the projection of an increased circuit breaker. So you spend more to get more.
Okay. And then also, the FY25 numbers in the slides, that FY25 includes the money from town meeting?
Yes.
That's in there, okay. Okay. Again, I reiterate Rich's comments about seeing that there was some plan for the sped audit, at least some dedication there, that there's, as we talked about, I think you mentioned in the meeting too, that you've got kind of your now, short-term, long-term, mid-range,
Yep.
plans, at least in the works. So, I know we've got a lot of irons in the fire, but to see that that's, one of them is nice to see. And then the doing intercom was nice to see as well. So hopefully that is some technology that's going to be tricky to navigate, but it's nice to see that's in there. So hopefully that works out. And I'll maybe have some better questions for you next month.
The good news is we get to do it again.
Yeah, well, Katie will be back with us, so she'll hear it for the first time, unless she wants to watch the meeting. Anything else from anybody here? Are you guys okay? And anything for the next meeting that you want to add for the next? We'll cover our goals, mid-year goals, district, school committee as well, superintendent, next meeting. Okay.
Motion to adjourn?
I'll second.
All right, and all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And we adjourn at 6 PM.